Hey guys, welcome back. So now, it's been a minute since we talked some X-Men, but Onslaught is back and we gotta get into this, cause this one-shot's got some moments, so let's just dive in. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top, so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with us getting into the Onslaught revelation, this one-shot is essentially Way of X Part 6, because within the Way of X 5-part series, we got this huge build-up about the return of Onslaught, and this time, unlike a number of other pump fakes of his return, Way of X was the real deal. And before we get into the Onslaught revelation, there's a few things from Way of X that I want to point out, because they set up a number of huge plot points for this series. Because throughout the discovery of Onslaught returning, we had found out that he was feeding off of the lost memories between the mutant's time of death and the previous backup that was used for the resurrection. But what we eventually get with Legion is him piecing together a plan that he doesn't necessarily have all the pieces of, and even some of the pieces that he did have, he didn't really share. But from looking in, we knew that he was getting the help of the Zorn brothers in order to build something within the pocket universe of his mind called the Altar or the House of El, which is something we learn more about throughout the course of the Onslaught revelation, and we'll talk more about it shortly. But with him creating this space, it's more like a safe haven that he's built within this space, along with the use of a Krakoan portal seed, which we'll see him put to use later on. But one of the things we had seen with Onslaught stealing the memories in between and growing with power, and even to beef up that tool, he had instigated a number of deaths, but with also killing a mass number of mutants, he had planted in their mind the idea of the crucible, which at this point he was more capable of doing with his influence growing substantially after even more deaths. And it's when we go into Onslaught Revelation where we find out that the crucible, it's set up to be this huge party to where all the mutants would go to, and as soon as the clock hit midnight, everyone would then just kill each other knowing that they would be resurrected and brought back. But what they didn't know is what Onslaught was working on in the background with taking control of their leaders and having Charles Xavier delete the backups so that when everyone dies here, they would die without the possibility of being resurrected. But before Pixie can make her way to the crucible, she's snatched up by Nightcrawler, who then makes multiple jumps to take her to a specific gate in Arakko that Legion has designated as an entry point to the altar, with it being crucial that she's one of the first people to be freed, because with her soul dagger she can then release others individually. And for her going forward, that's pretty much how the plan shakes out, with her trying to free as many people as she can get to, which really comes in handy when she frees Blink and Dazzler, who both play a huge role in the plans of getting everyone out of this party and over to the altar. Because for Pixie by herself, trying to get everyone out of there one stab at a time, it would just take too long. And with the way that the crucible is set up, if this party goes past midnight, then it's a wrap. Because with that many deaths, Onslaught will be restored to full power and pretty much to godhood after feeding on hundreds of murdered mutant minds. But then after this, with going back over to the altar, which by the way, this is a kind of huge moment for Legion, because though we've seen his mind before like as a prison, holding a countless number of identities with a number of power sets, which was a solution created for him at one point, but instead here in Onslaught Revelation, this is something new, because this is a space that he created, and doing so with pulling off for the most part feats that we've seen him do before, as far as his mind organizing into a pocket universe, but this time it's very different, and not just because of the components we saw him use to pull this off, but also just simply the fact that he pulled this off with his own intention, which right away makes me think of a particular moment within Way of X when he had began building the altar and he had reached out to Nightcrawler telling him that they have to be better than his father Charles, and with doing so at one point he was practically begging him like, help me be better than him. And it's pretty cool seeing that development or maturity on his part. And so now it's here where we're also still within the mind of Legion, to where we come across Fabian Cortez, who reminds Nightcrawler that he had did what he had asked by telling Kurt what had happened before he died, which at the time Kurt had only told him that as soon as he's resurrected, he wants Fabian to find him and just tell him the words, the spark, which also is significant, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But as for here and now in this moment, you have the case to where both Fabian and Lost, they've been at odds ever since Lost had found out that he was one of the Acolytes, who was Magneto's team back in the 90s, who had also killed the parents of Lost, which in her case turned her whole life upside down, because not long after she was captured to where she was then tested on for years, so when Fabian mentioned he was one of the Acolytes, she was triggered. And throughout the course of Way of X, with the addition of Onslaught nudging these two on, they had essentially been going back and forth, which eventually led to the point of Nightcrawler discovering how Onslaught needed to be stopped. And so while they're here within Legion's mind, it's here where Nightcrawler gives him a bit of a benediction of sorts. Because it's here where Nightcrawler tells Fabian that he needs to let go of his past and put his pride away. And he tells him because right now in this moment, whether we like it or not, the spark is with you. And when this happens, Fabian starts to open up, because for the longest time he had been suppressing a lot of self-hatred, Because for Fabian, he grew up rich, so he didn't have to earn anything, he didn't have to fight for anything, and he believed that that had changed as soon as his X gene kicked in and he got his powers. But then when he realized that his powers for the most part was just amplifying other mutants, it was then for him where he had thought at first, like, yeah, I'm a mutant, I get to fight and struggle like the small guy and build a name for myself. But with him discovering that his gift was essentially being super second fiddle, and this immediately deflated his hopes of becoming the type of mutant that could rise to prominence, and as a result, he had never changed his name to anything grand and compelling because he had convinced himself that nobody would celebrate that name anyway. And this is precisely why he has stuck with his name, just Fabian Cortez, with thinking of himself of being no better than a shadow, which is also why he leaped at the opportunity of becoming an acolyte, because he had figured it was his best chance to make a significant impact by stepping into the shadow of one of the most powerful mutants in the world, Magneto. But also while this is happening, we then catch up with Pixie, who's made her way to Magneto, to where in his case she gets rid of Onslaught pretty quick, and doing so by catching Magneto with the soul dagger right between the eyes, to where then they quickly go after Charles, and when Charles sees them, like, he dips. And I can just imagine Pixie looking at Charles and just being like, man, who knew Xavier can run fast? And I mean, I'm not trying to say nothing, but I'm just saying. But with this happening, it's here where we found out the part to where Blink and Dazzler had stepped in. Because with Dazzler heading to the DJ booth and Blink creating a shortcut from the current location of the crucible, which would then lead everyone from this party out of this location and over to the gate to where they can then pass through, making their way to the altar which was constructed by Legion. And this part of the plan works pretty smoothly with everybody high on Onslaught and also whatever Dr. Nemesis was passing around. So when this happens, nobody's really asking questions, they're just like, woo, you know, after the party, it's the after party. And man, let me tell you, like, if they was tripping before they got here, just imagine how lit the party got when they got to the altar. And I can't help but think, like, this one dude, he's floating around and he's just looking like, you know, so we still doing that thing at midnight? With a couple of them still holding the knives from the last venue. But then also with like seconds before everyone arrived, we then get this moment between Fabian and Lost, to where in this moment Lost finds it in herself to forgive him, or at the least not hate him in this moment. And as soon as she lets that anger go, something huge happens. Because it's here where we find out that years ago when Lost was taken, that this was done by Orcus, who, like we'd seen in House of X, for years they've been working on ways to destroy the mutants, to where in the case of Lost, who they'd been testing and experimenting with for years, to where recently they came up with the idea of planting Onslaught within her, anchored to her hatred for Fabian Cortez, with the plans of hiding Onslaught literally like a Trojan horse. But in this moment with her forgiving Fabian, this then destroys that anchor, releasing Onslaught, who then immediately bonds with Charles in order to just slaughter everybody here. But before this can happen, it's here where Legion then calls on Soraya, who's also known as Dust, who he had also mentioned before in Way of X, that the name given to her as far as Dust, that it's a horrible name, and really she has no idea of what she's truly capable of. And when he tells her like a better name would be Congregation, and it's here where she then uses her power and turns everyone who was congregating here at the altar into dust so that Onslaught cannot touch them. And when this happens, because all minds are one within the altar, when Nightcrawler sees this happening and is inspired to spin off the idea of the spark as a concept and a new way of life for mutants, and it's here where he crafts the idea or the foundation of this new way of life as it being this idea that'll invoke love and expression, and it being something that'll inspire their thoughts into actions. And really this has started back in Way of X issue 5, when Fabian had overcharged Nightcrawler in order to stop the moon from crashing into Mars, which was kind of Fabian's fault. Kind of. But it was in this moment that Kurt realized that all the events leading up to now, that they had shown him what needed to be done, which initially gave Kurt the idea or the concept of the spark, which is why he told Fabian, as soon as he comes back, to only say the spark and he'll know what to do. And really like with as far as like the concept of the spark with what it's become, it's almost like it's a sequence of epiphanies. Because even now it isn't until Kirk sees Soraya turn everyone into dust and just whisk them around Onslaught, to where he then knows to tell everyone to open up and to embrace, which then weakens Onslaught, which really makes this idea of the spark seem like the concept of just going forward without a complete plan and just waiting for the spark to give you the next step. And just with seeing that, I can only imagine that the spark, that it's gonna become like a way for mutants to walk by faith whenever placed in the circumstance of not having their memories from that time between their most recent death and their most recent resurrection. But we'll see. But with everybody joining together and having happy thoughts, Onslaught, he's shrunken down into just a little bug, and he's crushed. But then even after this is done, the altar, it still remains, and with doing so, it's also acknowledged as the House of L. And when Kirk approaches Legion, he asks that they set this place up as a headquarter of sorts. for mutants to come and defend what unites them. And for those mutants who would operate out of here, they would be called legionaries, which really just gives off the vibe of like Jedi mutants, and I can dig it. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.